Caleb Sterling stood on the sun-bleached wooden platform of the Missoula station. The year was 1888. The Montana air was thin and sharp. It tasted of pine needles and distant snow. He had come to meet a woman he had never seen. He had paid for her passage with the last of his savings. He had bought a bride to save a dying ranch and a broken heart. Before the afternoon ended, his world would tilt on its axis. A stranger would step off the train. She would tell him he had bought the wrong bride. Before we begin, tell us where you are listening from today. Then stay with Caleb and Martha to the very end of the trail. The sun hung heavy in a vast, unblinking sky. It radiated a deceptive warmth against Caleb's broad, weary shoulders. Inside, he felt a winter that refused to melt. The warmth of the mountain afternoon could not reach his spirit. He gripped a bouquet of wild pink bitterroot flowers. They were translucent and fragile in the harsh light. He had gathered them at dawn near the churning river. The dew had been a silver coat over the earth then. Now the flowers were beginning to wilt. They bowed their heads in the dry, thin air. Beside him stood his 6-year-old daughter, Rosie. She was a small, quiet ghost of the woman he had lost. She wore her best Sunday dress of faded calico. The sleeves were too short for her growing arms. Her small, dirt-smudged hand was tucked into his calloused palm. She was his anchor in a world of shifting shadows. Caleb adjusted his sweat-stained hat. He smoothed a dark vest that lacked a grease stain.
He was a man carved by the Bitterroot Valley itself. The last 2 years had been a brutal lesson in humility. The big die-up of 1886 had nearly finished him. History would remember that winter as a frozen hell on the plains. Tens of thousands of cattle had died across the northern ranges. They were frozen upright in the drifting snow. The big die-up had turned dreams into white graveyards. When the thaw finally came, the land was littered with bone. Caleb called it the end of hope. It left the rolling hills eerily quiet. It left his pockets empty and his heart hollow. The silence of the hills was a physical weight. His wife, Sarah, had been taken by the fever 3 years ago. The ranch needed a woman's hand to survive. Rosie needed a mother's heart to grow. So Caleb had spent his final dollars on letters and a ticket. He was expecting a woman named Abigail. She was a school teacher from the crowded streets of St. Louis. The train whistle shrieked in the far distance. It was a lonely, piercing sound. It echoed off the jagged granite peaks of the Sapphire Mountains. The Northern Pacific engine rounded the rocky bend. It was a black iron beast breathing fire and soot. It belched obsidian smoke into the perfect blue canopy. Rosie jumped on the wooden boards of the platform. Her eyes were wide with a desperate, heartbreaking hope. "Is she here, Papa?" she asked. Her voice trembled like a leaf in a mountain storm. "Is the new lady finally coming home with us?"
Caleb swallowed a hard, dry lump of anxiety. "I reckon so, honey," he whispered. His heart hammered against his ribs with a sharp doubt. The train slowed with a deafening metallic screech. The platform shook under the weight of the iron giant. Steam hissed violently from the undercarriage. It was a white shroud that engulfed their boots. People began to descend into the wild land. It was a parade of strangers seeking fortune or escape. He saw a family with 3 rowdy, soot-covered boys. Then he saw her. She stood framed in the door of the passenger car. She was a portrait of quiet, stubborn defiance. She did not look like the pale woman in the photograph. The Abigail he expected was fragile. She was a flower that might break in a Montana breeze. This woman was tall and strong. She stood with a spine made of mountain pine. Her dark curly hair escaped the confines of a modest bonnet. She wore a simple blue travel dress of heavy wool. It was coated in the fine gray dust of 1,000 miles. Her eyes were the color of the Clark Fork River after rain. They were gray, deep, and filled with intelligence. She surveyed the peaks as if measuring her own strength. Then, her gaze landed on Caleb. She looked at the small girl clinging to his leg. She stepped down the iron stairs with a steady grace. She carried a single wooden trunk with scarred iron clasps. Caleb walked forward on legs that felt like lead. He held out the wilting pink bitterroots.
It was a peace offering to a complete stranger.
Miss Abigail?" he asked. His voice cracked under the weight of the moment. The woman stopped. Her boots came to a rest in the thick Montana dust. She looked at the pathetic flowers in his shaking hand. She looked at the rugged man whose face was a map of winters. She looked at the little girl who was praying for a miracle. A shadow of profound regret flickered across her face. She didn't reach for the flowers. She reached for a steadying breath instead. "I am not Abigail," she said. Her voice was rich and steady, like a low cello note. Caleb froze. The air turned to ice in his lungs. The bustle of the station faded into a muffled roar. "Where is Abigail?" he finally managed to ask. His world was tilting, sliding away from him. Martha Vance looked down at her scuffed leather boots. "She didn't come, Mr. Sterling. She reached the station in St. Louis, and she broke. She looked at the map of the West and feared the silence. She said she couldn't live where the wind never stops." Caleb felt a cold weight sink into his stomach. He had spent his final savings on a ghost. The flowers in his hand felt like a mocking gesture. Martha looked up at him with burning gray eyes. She was going to throw the ticket into the mud. The conductor barely glanced at the name on the paper. To him, I was only another tired woman heading west. I stood there with nothing but that trunk and my dignity. I refused to begin a new life with another lie. I had already lived that way once before. I had lost my position at the textile mill. I had no kin left in this world to claim me. I told her I would take her place on that iron horse. I told her I wasn't afraid of the silence or the mountains. She looked him directly in the eye. She refused to flinch or turn away. "You bought the wrong bride, sir," she said. "I am a stranger who stole a seat to find a reason to breathe. I will understand if you tell me to leave right now. I can sit on this platform and wait for the return train." She stood there, brave and utterly alone. She was a woman with nowhere left to go. But Caleb saw the subtle tremor in her hands. He saw the fear she fought so hard to hide from the world. She had gambled her entire future on the kindness of a stranger. Rosie peeked out from behind Caleb's heavy trousers. She looked at the dusty blue dress and the kind face. "Do you know how to braid hair?" Rosie asked. The question was small and filled with fragile hope. It shattered the suffocating tension of the afternoon. Martha knelt down right there in the Missoula dust. She ignored the grime on her skirts. She brought herself to eye level with the motherless child. "I do," Martha whispered. A genuine smile touched her lips for the first time.
"I can do a French braid or a crown for a princess," Rosie smiled back. It was a beam of pure sunlight through a stormy sky. It was the first time she had smiled at a stranger in years. Caleb had almost forgotten what that smile looked like. For months, Rosie had spoken only when she needed something. She no longer chased butterflies. She no longer laughed at the calves stumbling across the pasture. Since Sarah died, the little girl had carried sadness far too heavy for such small shoulders. Yet now she was looking at Martha as though she had been waiting for her all along. Caleb felt something painful loosen inside his chest. He realized this moment was no longer about finding a wife. It was about giving his daughter a chance to be a child again. Caleb looked at Martha Vance. He didn't see a thief or a liar standing there. He saw a woman who had survived her own blizzards. He saw a woman honest enough to tell a hard truth, even when a lie would have been easier to tell. She could have hidden her identity for weeks. For one long moment, Caleb said nothing at all. He wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. Then he looked at his daughter's radiant face. He looked at the glowing horizon and then at Martha. Caleb finally smiled. It was the slow movement of a heart reopening. He reached out his rough, calloused hand. His palm was open and honest. "Well, Martha Vance," he said. His voice was finding its natural strength again. "The Bitterroot Valley is a big, lonely place.
There is room for one more soul in the silence. I reckon the wind won't be as loud with three of us. I'm Caleb, and this is Rosie. We've got a long ride ahead of us before dark." Martha looked at his hand. She saw the power in his work-worn fingers. She reached out and took it. Her grip was firm, solid, and certain. His hand felt like a mountain. It was immovable, steady, and warm. "I'm a good worker, Caleb," she promised. Her eyes searched his for any sign of regret. "I can cook, I can sew, and I can make a neglected house feel like home. I am truly not afraid of the hard work ahead." Caleb nodded. His heart felt strangely light for the first time in years. "Good," he said. "The Sterling Ranch offers plenty of work and a fine view." He picked up her trunk. He was surprised by how light it felt in his grasp. It told him everything about her life in the East. She had left nothing behind but the shadows of her past. They walked together toward the waiting wagon. They were a mismatched trio of souls seeking a home. The air smelled of pine, horse sweat, and fresh-cut timber. Missoula was growing quickly in those years. New brick buildings were rising like monuments to progress. The silver mines were booming in the nearby hills, but the ranchers were fighting for every inch of survival. They climbed into the high wagon seat. Rosie was tucked safely in the middle. The little girl chattered as the horses began to trot. She talked about the red calf and the eagles. She talked about the creek that never dried up. Martha listened as if every word was a precious gem. She was collecting them like treasure in her heart. She didn't look at the mountains as a threat. She looked at them as a sacred promise kept by the earth. As they drove, the sun began its slow descent. It dipped behind the jagged peaks of the Bitterroot Range. The mountains turned a deep royal purple. The sky burned with a vibrant, bleeding orange. It felt like the fire of a new beginning. Caleb watched the road, yet he remained aware of the woman beside him. Something in the cool evening air felt unexpectedly right. The horse's hooves struck the dry earth with a rhythmic beat. It was the sound of a clock ticking toward a new life. They reached the ranch after the stars pierced the dark. The house was a small, sturdy log cabin. It was nestled in the shadow of a sheltering hill. It was built to withstand the rage of a Montana winter. But in the moonlight, it looked lonely and tired. Caleb lit the kerosene lanterns inside. The yellow light began to dance on the log walls. "It isn't much to look at yet," he said. He felt a sharp pang of shame for his poverty. The furniture was sparse and hand-hewn. The air smelled of wood smoke and old dust. Martha walked into the kitchen. She touched the cold iron of the heavy stove. She saw the mountain of dirty plates and the dust. She saw the holes in the thin, ragged curtains. She saw the frayed edges of Rosie's small sweater. "It's a home," Martha said softly. She opened the tiny cupboard beside the stove. There were only a few jars of beans, a little flour, some dried herbs hanging from a beam. Nothing more. She quietly closed the cupboard without saying a word. Caleb noticed the movement. He expected disappointment. Instead, Martha smiled. "We already have everything that matters. We have a roof. We have honest work. And Rosie still believes tomorrow can be better." Her voice echoed gently.